The man who sat by Joseph's side, writing the Book of Abraham translation, ended up leading an armed takeover of the temple. That's the story most people have never heard. But before the betrayal, before the pistols in the Kirtland Temple, before the heartbreak, there was a young convert who burned with zeal, marched 1,000 miles for Zion, and became one of Joseph Smith's most trusted friends. This is the rise of Warren Parrish. 1833. Warren Parrish was 33 years old, a New Yorker by birth, married to Betsey Patton, and searching. He had already walked away from the Baptist faith of his youth, like so many in those restless years after the Second Great Awakening. He was hungry for something real, something that felt like the ancient church restored. On May 20th, in the little settlement of Teresa, New York, Brigham Young stepped into the water and baptized Warren. The same day, he baptized several members of the Patton family, Betsey's relatives, including David W. Patton, who would soon become one of the church's first apostles. Warren came up out of the water on fire. He was all in. Within months, he and Betsey had sold what they owned and moved to Kirtland, Ohio, the new gathering place of the saints. He threw himself into the work. He was ordained an elder. He preached. He believed with every fiber that the Lord had raised up a prophet and that Zion would soon be redeemed. Then came the call that tested everything. In the summer of 1833, the saints in Jackson County, Missouri, had been driven from their homes by mob violence. Joseph Smith said he received a revelation: raise an army of Israel, Zion's camp, and march to their rescue. Warren didn't hesitate. On May 4th, 1834, he and Betsey left Kirtland with roughly 200 men. It was a brutal 1,000-mile march through heat, rain, and sickness. They drilled as a militia. They prayed. They sang hymns around campfires. Warren marched shoulder to shoulder with the men who would become legends: Brigham Young, Heber C. Kimball, Orson Hyde, and a quiet, intense young missionary named Wilford Woodruff. Betsey, one of only a handful of women on the expedition, walked beside her husband, helping with the cooking, the sick, and the endless labor of keeping the camp moving forward. But Zion's camp never fired a shot in battle. Cholera swept through the camp near Rush Creek in Clay County, Missouri. On June 27th, Betsey Parrish, Warren's beloved wife of more than a decade, was taken by the disease. She was the only woman from the main camp to die. Warren watched her suffer, then wrapped her in a blanket and buried her on the Missouri prairie in a hasty grave. He had come to redeem Zion and lost the person he loved most. The camp was disbanded. Joseph told the saints that the redemption of Zion would come in the Lord's own time. Warren returned to Kirtland a widower, grieving, but still believing. The Lord had accepted the offering of those who marched, even if the immediate deliverance was delayed. In the spring and summer 1835, the Lord had more work for Warren. In February, the Quorum of the 70 was organized. Warren was called as one of its members. Just weeks later, in April, he was called on a mission to the South. He met up with Wilford Woodruff in Benton County, Tennessee. The two became fast friends and powerful companions. For nearly 4 months, they tromped across Tennessee and Kentucky, preaching daily, baptizing dozens. Warren, the older and more experienced elder, ordained Wilford to the office of elder. They faced mobs, slept in barns, and rejoiced as whole families joined the church. By late July, Warren was called back to Kirtland, still faithful, still burning with zeal. Back in Kirtland, Joseph Smith was looking for a new personal scribe. On October 29th, he hired Warren at $15 a month. Warren moved into the prophet's household circle. He began keeping Joseph's journal, copying revelations, and assisting with church business. He was no longer just a missionary. He was now Joseph's right-hand man. The Smith home was a hive of activity in those months. Domestic help came and went, including a young woman named Fanny Alger, who assisted Emma with housework. Warren, newly arrived in that close inner circle, would soon find his own path forward. Later that year, Joseph Smith himself performed Warren's marriage to Martha Raymond, a quiet moment of personal renewal amid the whirlwind of revelation and translation. Then came the revelation that would define his calling. November 14th, 1835. Joseph received a personal revelation for Warren. Standing in the prophet's small office, Warren took down the words himself as they fell from Joseph's lips. Verily, thus saith the Lord unto my servant Joseph, concerning my servant Warren, behold, it shall come to pass in his day that he shall see great things show forth themselves unto my people. He shall see much of my ancient records, and shall know of hidden things, and shall be endowed with a knowledge of hidden languages. And if he desire, and shall seek at my hands, he shall be privileged with writing much of my word, as a scribe unto me for the benefit of my people. And it shall be said of him in time to come, behold Warren, the Lord's scribe for the Lord's seer, whom he hath appointed in Israel. Warren's heart pounded. Here was the prophet Joseph, who taught that he and his family carried the literal blood of Ephraim, the birthright son of Joseph of Egypt, declaring that Warren would stand at his side. Joseph had long taught that his lineage was no mere symbol. It was a real divine appointment. Ephraim's descendants were chosen to stand at the head in the last days, to bear the priesthood, gather scattered Israel, establish Zion as both a holy society and a preparatory government, and prepare the world for the second coming of Jesus Christ. Warren, serving as scribe to this Ephraimite seer, would help bring forth the sacred records that would fuel that gathering, ancient records, hidden languages, the promise of being the prophet's personal scribe for sacred translation work. It was the kind of calling most men only dreamed of. Just days later, the promise began to unfold. November 19th. Joseph sat with the Egyptian papyri he had purchased the previous July. Warren took his place at the prophet's side. As Joseph dictated the translation, Warren's pen flew across the page. He recorded in Joseph's journal, I returned home and spent the day in translating the Egyptian records. The next day, we spent the day in translating and made rapid progress. More sessions followed on the 24th and the 25th. Several surviving manuscripts of the Book of Abraham, including portions covering Abraham 1:4 through 2:18, are in Warren Parrish's own handwriting. Years later, even after he had left the church, Warren would write that he had sat by his side and penned down the translation of the Egyptian hieroglyphics as he claimed to receive it by direct inspiration from heaven. The Revelation's promise of hidden languages was being fulfilled before his eyes. Warren was helping bring forth a sacred scripture that would open new vistas of doctrine and history to the church. By the end of 1835, Warren Parrish stood at the very center of the Restoration. Trusted friend, zealous missionary, member of the 70, personal scribe to the prophet, newly remarried. The future looked absolutely amazing. As Mormon history detective, I'm asking, how could a man writing those sacred words as scribe to the prophet of God, whose veins flowed with the blood of Ephraim, chosen to establish Zion and gather Israel, someone so immersed in translation, missionary work, and building the Kirtland Temple for the salvation of mankind, later have his belief so completely upended that he would turn that very temple he helped build into a battleground, leading the charge against the man he had once loved and served so faithfully? What happened? What could pry such conviction from a heart that had stood at the very center of the Restoration? Next time, the Kirtland Safety Society collapses. Warren, now deep inside the bank's operations as teller and cashier, sees the gap between promise and reality, and his faith begins to crack. Warren Parrish's story is one of the most dramatic rises and fall in early Mormon history. Subscribe, share, and join as we follow the man who sat at Joseph's side until he didn't.